The open ocean once hid its pathways from all but the most observant. Prehistoric mariners crossed thousands of miles with no maps or instruments, guided only by the natural world. This video uncovers the lost art of ancient navigation, revealing how they achieved the impossible. You will learn the forgotten skills that let humans conquer the greatest wilderness on Earth. How did they read secret maps written in the stars? What whispered clues did they find in the flight of a bird or the swell of a wave? What does their incredible journey teach us about our own place in the world today? A dark, moonless ocean offers no landmarks, only a ceiling of countless stars. For the ancient Polynesian navigator, this was not a source of confusion but a map painted in light. They did not just look at the stars, they knew them as guiding spirits, each one holding a fixed position in the great dome of the sky. Their most vital tool was a mental construct known as a star compass, a brilliant system that divided the horizon into 32 houses. Each house was the domain of a specific star, marking where it would rise and where it would set. A navigator steering toward the house of the star Sirius, for example, knew they were holding a true southerly course. This was far more than simple memorization. It was a dynamic, living knowledge. A master navigator understood the sky's slow dance through the night and across the seasons. They knew that as one guiding star finally dipped below the waves, another would be rising in a different part of the sky, ready to take its place and keep them on their path. This constant, predictable motion created a celestial highway across the open ocean. Can you fathom possessing such a deep connection to the cosmos that you could feel your way across an entire planet using only this shimmering, ancient clockwork? This incredible star knowledge was complemented by another, more constant celestial guide, one that ruled the day. While the stars were a map by night, the sun was the unwavering guide by day. Picture a Viking longship, its dragon prow slicing through the cold Atlantic spray. With no land in sight for weeks, the crew's survival depended on reading the sun's daily journey. From the Polynesian voyagers to Arab traders in the Indian Ocean, ancient mariners mastered the art of solar navigation. They watched the sun's path with an intimate understanding, knowing its arc could reveal both direction and their distance from the equator. At the exact moment the sun reached its highest point, what we call noon, it pointed unerringly to the south in the northern hemisphere and to the north in the southern. This was their true north, a fixed reference in a shifting seascape. But how did they measure this with no instruments? They used the world's simplest tool, a stick placed upright in the ground. By watching the shadow it cast, a navigator could track the sun's movement. The key moment came at local noon, when the shadow was at its absolute shortest. The length of that noon shadow was a direct message from the sky. A very short shadow meant the sun was almost directly overhead, telling them they were near the equator. A longer shadow indicated they were sailing in higher latitudes, farther from the world's warm belt. This required more than just a quick glance. It demanded a deep knowledge of the seasons. A navigator knew that the sun's path shifted throughout the year, rising and setting in different places along the horizon. This wisdom informed not just their direction, but the very timing of their voyages. They planned epic journeys for when the sun's position would make their chosen latitude easiest to hold. Can you feel the confidence it would take to entrust your entire journey, your very life, to the consistent, predictable passage of our closest star? This celestial partnership between sun and stars was brilliant, but the ocean itself held even more immediate secrets, written not in the sky, but in the water all around them. Yet even the most steadfast celestial guide could be stolen by the clouds. In those moments of total sensory deprivation, ancient navigators turned to a more immediate source of information, the very rhythm of the ocean beneath their vessel. They learned to read the sea's pulse. On a traditional Micronesian proa, a navigator would sometimes lie down in the canoe, closing his eyes to heighten his other senses. He was feeling for the deep, resonant roll of the ocean swells, the largest and most powerful waves generated by distant weather systems. These swells became his compass. A master navigator could distinguish the subtle difference between a swell coming directly from the east and one shifting slightly to the northeast. He could feel this through the hull, sensing the pattern of lift and fall that told him if he was holding his course. This was not a vague feeling, it was a precise science passed down through generations. In the Marshall Islands, this knowledge was so vital that they created physical maps of the ocean's rhythms, known as stick charts. These beautiful, web-like constructions were made from palm fronds and cowrie shells. The shells represented islands, while the curved palm strips mapped out the patterns of the swells, showing how they bent and refracted around the land masses. A navigator would study these charts not to see the islands but to feel the waves. He learned that as a deep ocean swell approached an island, it would wrap around it, creating a specific interference pattern in the water. By feeling this new, confused pattern of waves, he could detect the presence of an island long before it was visible on the horizon, sometimes from 50 miles away or more. He was not looking for land, he was feeling its echo in the sea. This allowed him to sail a confident course through vast archipelagos, using the ocean itself as his chart. Furthermore, the persistent swells driven by the trade winds provided a constant, reliable road across the open ocean. A Polynesian wayfinder knew to ignore the smaller, choppy waves created by the local wind, which changed direction constantly. Instead, he tuned his senses to the underlying, rhythmic groundswell that marched steadily from one quadrant of the globe. It was a highway of motion, a permanent feature of the seascape that he could trust. Can you imagine developing such a profound intimacy with the natural world that you could feel your way across an entire ocean, your eyes closed, guided only by the lift and fall of the water? This deep listening to the sea was complemented by another living guide, one that soared above the waves. A tern flying steadily away from your boat is not just a bird, it is a message. For a sailor lost on the endless blue, the purposeful flight of a bird was the most hopeful sign in the world, a living arrow pointing toward solid ground. Ancient mariners forged profound partnerships with the avian world, turning birds into their most reliable scouts. This was not a matter of guesswork, it was a science of careful observation passed down through generations. Navigators came to know the distinct habits of each species. A frigate bird, for instance, is a coastal creature that must return to land each night. If a navigator saw one of these great birds flying in a specific direction late in the day, he could confidently follow its path, knowing it led to a resting place. The true genius lay in understanding the maximum flight ranges of these feathered guides. Spotting a tiny noddy tern far at sea might mean land was within 40 or 50 miles, its range limited by its small size. But the appearance of a powerful shearwater could signal that an island was over 100 miles away. This knowledge transformed an impossibly vast ocean into a series of manageable search areas. The great colonization voyages across the Pacific were almost certainly aided by this wisdom. Settlers sailing into the unknown would have watched the flyways of migratory birds, seeing in their ancient, instinctual routes a pre-drawn map to new homes. Norse sagas tell of sailors using ravens to find Iceland, releasing the birds and following their flight toward the horizon. This practice required immense patience and deep ecological knowledge. Misreading a bird's intention, confusing a species that slept on the water with one that returned to land, could lead a crew to sail on into emptiness and hardship. What does this ancient alliance teach us? It reminds us that navigation was a conversation with the natural world, a dialogue built on respect and meticulous observation. These sailors understood that the secrets to their survival were written in the behavior of other species, a lesson in interconnectedness that feels deeply relevant today. This feathered intelligence was deeply interwoven with another elemental force, one that filled the sails and dictated the rhythm of every voyage. The steady breath of the world, the trade winds, filled the sails of ancient vessels like a promise. For prehistoric mariners, the wind was not a random force but a structured system of global highways. They did not simply wait for a favorable breeze. They orchestrated their epic journeys around the predictable rhythms of the planet's breathing. In the Indian Ocean, how captains possessed detailed manuals that linked the changing monsoon winds to the positions of specific stars. They knew that a certain constellation rising at dusk signaled the imminent shift to a wind that would carry them to East Africa, and they planned their departures with the precision of a modern train schedule. This was a profound collaboration with the climate, a dance with the seasons. Pacific Islanders demonstrated an even more astonishing grasp of long-term patterns. They recognized that every few years, the usual easterly trade winds would weaken or even reverse, becoming westerlies. Today, we call this an El Niño event, but they identified this oscillation centuries ago through careful observation. A navigator setting out to colonize a new island would use the steady easterlies for the outward journey, knowing that when it was time to return, this wind reversal would provide a direct route home. They were, in effect, sailing on a round-trip ticket written in the language of the atmosphere. This vast repository of knowledge was far too precious to be left to fragile scrolls or memory alone. It was woven into the very fabric of their culture, encoded in epic songs, rhythmic chants, and the great stories told and retold around evening fires. A single chant could contain the seasonal calendar, the names of the guiding stars for each wind, and the sailing directions to a distant archipelago. This transformed navigation from a technical skill into a living tradition, ensuring that the knowledge of the wind roads would survive for generations. How might our own modern journeys, so often disconnected from the natural world, be enriched by such a deep, intuitive partnership with the elements? This mastery of the wind provided the power, but the navigator still needed one final, critical skill to plot his position on the endless blue, a practice known as dead reckoning. A navigator's true instrument was the mind itself, a living chart constantly updating with every passing wave. This was the discipline of dead reckoning, the art of conjuring your position from nothing but memory, time, and motion. Without a single mechanical aid for measuring longitude, these ancient sailors performed a continuous mental calculation that would challenge the sharpest modern mind. It began with a known starting point, a last sight of land or a familiar star path. From that moment, the navigator became a human computer, integrating three vital streams of information. First was speed, estimated not by a log but by the feel of water rushing past the hull, the sound of the wake, and the pull of the sails. Second was time, measured in the slow fall of sand in a glass or, more often, by the majestic progression of the sun and stars across the sky. Third was direction, held true by the celestial guides. The Viking navigator, for instance, constantly synthesized these inputs. He knew his ship's pace, he felt the hours pass, and he held his course by the sun. In his mind, he plotted a line across a vast, imaginary chart, marking his theoretical position. But the ocean is never still. A current could push him sideways for days, a storm could blow him far off track. This is where true mastery emerged. The navigator had to account for this drift, a factor called leeway, estimating its push based on the angle of the waves and the wind's force on the hull. The Polynesian wayfinder took this a step further, using subtle cues from the environment to correct his mental plot. He watched for specific cloud formations that often gather over distant islands, and he noted the types of seabirds and marine life, knowing their presence hinted at unseen land and shifting currents. To hold this ever-changing calculation in your head for weeks, across thousands of miles of empty ocean, required a monumental feat of concentration and memory. One error, one forgotten adjustment for a current, could compound over days and mean missing your target by hundreds of miles. What does this profound intellectual achievement reveal about the untapped potential of the human mind when it is fully immersed in its environment? It stands as a powerful testament to a form of intelligence that is deeply connected, patient, and resilient. This incredible mental mapping was at times assisted by a few simple yet brilliant physical tools. A gloomy sky offered no visible sun, yet a Norse sailor could still find its hidden position. He held a translucent crystal known as a sunstone to his eye. This was not magic, but an application of optics, using the mineral's ability to polarize light. By rotating the stone and watching for a specific brightening pattern in the clouded heavens, he could pinpoint the sun's location with startling accuracy, turning a featureless gray dome into a precise directional guide. While ancient navigators were masters of pure observation, they also ingeniously augmented their senses with simple, purpose-built tools. The camel, a device used by Arab sailors in the Indian Ocean, was a masterpiece of elegant simplicity. It was just a small, rectangular wooden board with a knotted string passed through its center. A sailor would hold the string taut at his mouth and maneuver the board until its top edge aligned with the North Star and its bottom edge kissed the horizon. The specific knot on the string that met his eye told him his latitude, a direct measurement of how far north he had traveled. This humble tool transformed the immeasurable sky into a quantifiable number, a vital piece of data for crossing vast, open water. Later periods saw the development of more complex devices like the astrolabe and cross staff, which refined these measurements further, but the principle remained the same, bridging the immense gap between human senses and technological precision. In the Pacific, the tools were even more integrated with the environment. Navigators used what we might call horizon sticks, simple wooden poles or the mast of the canoe itself. They would align specific rising or setting stars with these fixed references, creating a portable star compass that moved with the vessel. These instruments were never crutches, they were extensions of the navigator's own perception, honed to provide greater accuracy when conditions were at their most challenging. How might the simple, mindful tools we use in our own lives, from a compass on a hike to an app that tracks the moon, help us reconnect with these lost skills of perception and place? This tangible, crafted knowledge was far too vital to be left to chance. It had to be preserved and passed down with absolute fidelity, a responsibility that fell to the most powerful and enduring of all human technologies, the spoken word. An elder's voice rises and falls in a rhythmic chant, each syllable a coordinate on a mental map of the ocean. In a world without writing, this was how the greatest secrets of the sea were preserved. Oral traditions were not merely stories, they were the living, breathing libraries of entire cultures, designed to hold immense amounts of navigational data and protect it across countless generations. The rhythm and rhyme of a chant transformed abstract information into something unforgettable, embedding star paths, wave patterns, and wind lore directly into the mind of a young apprentice. This was knowledge transfer at its most powerful and elegant. Anthropologists note that these traditions relied on sophisticated mnemonic devices, using song, story, and even dance to encode complex systems in a format that was both durable and easily retrieved. Consider the Micronesian system of Etak. A navigator would mentally divide a long voyage into segments, but his reference point was not static. He would visualize a specific guiding star moving from one imaginary island to another behind his destination. As his canoe sailed forward, this star would appear to slide across the star compass, marking the completion of one Etak segment and the beginning of the next. Each of these segments was tied to a specific part of an epic story, allowing the navigator to track his progress not by hours or miles, but by the unfolding of a narrative. His journey became a living legend, and his position was a line in a song. This knowledge was considered sacred, taught not in a classroom but through long initiation and close apprenticeship. The master navigator did not just recite facts, he performed a legacy, ensuring that every subtle nuance, every correction for a strange current, was passed to the next keeper of the way with perfect accuracy. The survival of entire communities depended on this flawless transmission. What can these ancient oral systems teach us about learning and memory today? They remind us that knowledge embedded in story and rhythm has a profound staying power, that the most vital information is often carried not on a page but in the human voice. And just as these cultures listened to the wisdom of their elders, they also learned to interpret the silent language of the life teeming beneath their hulls. A sudden change in the water's color from deep ocean blue to a softer turquoise was a message written in light. Ancient mariners saw the sea not as an empty space, but as a living, breathing landscape teeming with navigational clues. They possessed an intimate ecological literacy, interpreting the presence and behavior of marine life as clear biological signposts. Early European explorers in the Caribbean recorded their astonishment as indigenous guides directed their ships by following the seasonal migrations of sea turtles, trusting these ancient creatures to lead them unerringly to remote islands. In the vast Pacific, wayfinders knew that dense schools of certain fish were rarely found in the open ocean, their appearance signaling the nearby presence of a submerged reef system, even if the island itself remained below the horizon. This was a sophisticated taxonomy of the sea, a mental catalog that linked specific animals to depth, water temperature, and proximity to land. The sight of a frigatebird, a creature that must return to shore each night, created an invisible circle of possibility on the chart, a radius within which land certainly lay. In contrast, the appearance of a petrel, a bird that could sleep on the open water, told a very different story, one of deep ocean and a long journey still ahead. This knowledge transformed the ocean's biodiversity into a living, dynamic map. Every dolphin pod racing alongside the hull, every patch of distinctive sargassum seaweed, was not just a sight to behold, but a data point to be integrated into the navigator's ever-evolving mental calculation. How might our own hurried journeys change if we learned to see the world with such attentive eyes, reading the subtle signals of the life around us? This profound connection to the environment was the final, essential layer in a vast and interconnected system of natural navigation. A stationary cloud on an endless horizon was more than just weather, it was a landmark. Ancient navigators learned to read the sky's subtle architecture, understanding that the formation and behavior of clouds could reveal secrets far beyond the reach of the naked eye. The most telling sign was a single, puffy cumulus cloud that seemed to hang motionless in an otherwise clear sky. This was often the visible breath of an island. The landmass below would heat the air above it, causing it to rise and condense into a cloud that appeared anchored in place. a silent sentinel marking an unseen shore from over 50 miles away. The Maori of New Zealand were masters of this, identifying specific, recurring cloud formations that clung to their mountainous coasts, turning the sky itself into a chart of approaching land. But clouds spoke of more than just land. The color and texture of the sky at dawn and dusk were a daily forecast. A red sky in the morning, caused by sunlight filtering through high dust particles ahead of an approaching weather system, signaled that sailors should take caution. A red sky at night, however, often meant fair weather was coming, as the stable air to the west was clear enough to scatter the sun's rays into a benevolent glow. This law was not superstition, it was accumulated physics, observed and verified over countless generations. Misreading these atmospheric cues was not a minor error. It could mean sailing directly into a typhoon or being blown past a life-saving island by an unexpected gale. The ability to forecast with such accuracy required a lifetime of patient observation, a deep dialogue with the wind and the waves. What would it feel like to possess such an intimate bond with the atmosphere that you could feel a storm brewing in your bones long before the first cloud appeared? This mastery of the world above was perfectly complemented by a deep understanding of the hidden rivers flowing beneath their hulls. The ocean itself was a moving map, its great currents flowing like invisible rivers through the deep. A Japanese junk sailing north would feel the steady, warm pull of the Kuroshio current, a powerful stream that could have the time of a voyage or, if misjudged, carry a ship helplessly past its destination. Ancient mariners did not fight these forces, they learned to ride them. From Phoenician traders in the Mediterranean to Polynesian wayfinders in the vast Pacific, generations of sailors mapped these submerged highways through direct, often perilous experience. They became master strategists of the sea's hidden circulation. The key was detection without instruments. A navigator would constantly scan the water's surface for clues. A line of driftwood or a patch of distinctive seaweed, especially types that grew only in coastal waters, signaled the presence of a current moving differently from the local wind. Changes in water temperature were equally telling. A sudden pocket of warm water in a cold sea, or a chill where it should be warm, marked the boundary of a major flow, like the Gulf Stream parting from the colder North Atlantic. Even the water's color held meaning, shifting from a deep, nutrient-rich blue to a lighter, sediment-laden green as one current gave way to another. This constant observation was integrated into the navigator's mental chart, a dynamic understanding of how the ocean was moving beneath him. The great colonization of the Pacific Islands stands as the ultimate testament to this mastery. Polynesian voyagers intentionally used the east-flowing south equatorial current as a natural conveyor belt to facilitate their westward expansion across thousands of miles of open ocean. They would time their departures to harness this flow, dramatically reducing the physical effort required and increasing their chances of successful landfall. This was not passive drifting, it was active, intelligent navigation using the ocean's own energy. They knew where the currents began, where they flowed, and critically, how to escape them when necessary, using shifts in the wind to cross from one current into another. This deep collaboration with the planet's circulatory system turned a formidable challenge into a strategic advantage. How might we, in our own complex journeys, learn to identify and work with the natural currents of our lives instead of exhausting ourselves by constantly swimming against the tide? Such profound environmental awareness was only possible because of an even deeper internal strength, a quality of mind that allowed these explorers to face the immense psychological void of the open sea. The vast emptiness of the open ocean was the ultimate test of the mind. Beyond the stars and the swells lay a psychological frontier where a single moment of doubt could unravel weeks of careful reckoning. Ancient navigators faced a profound isolation that few of us can truly comprehend. Their only companion, a complex and constantly updating mental chart that they had to hold with absolute fidelity against the creeping whispers of fatigue and fear. This was not merely a test of memory, but of deep, unwavering concentration. Cognitive scientists studying modern wayfinding traditions note that master navigators often employ techniques strikingly similar to meditation, entering a state of heightened, sustained focus that allows them to filter out distraction and tune into the most subtle environmental signals. In this almost trance-like state, the rhythm of the waves, the position of a star, and the feel of the wind become the only reality, a flowing dataset that the mind integrates into a single, cohesive whole. This internal representation, what researchers call a cognitive map, was a living simulation of the seascape. It was not a static picture but a dynamic model that updated in real time, incorporating the push of a forgotten current or the correction from a new bird sighting. The Micronesian navigator, for example, could hold hundreds of distinct star courses and island sequences in his mind, a feat of spatial memory that rivals the abilities of today's most celebrated memory champions. He did not just memorize lists, he inhabited a mental world as rich and detailed as the physical one, a world where every Etak segment completed was a chapter recalled from an epic poem. This immense mental discipline was the final, invisible tool. It was the force that kept a steady hand on the steering paddle when storms erased the sky and disorientation threatened to consume logic. It was the quiet voice that reassured the crew when the journey stretched longer than expected, a voice backed by the absolute certainty of knowledge passed down through generations. What does this profound inner fortitude reveal about our own potential? It suggests that the human mind, when fully engaged and deeply connected to its purpose, can achieve a level of focus and resilience that seems almost superhuman. This incredible psychological strength did not emerge from a vacuum. It was carefully cultivated and supported by the entire cultural world the navigator carried with him. A voyage began long before the canoe ever touched the water, with a quiet ceremony on a moonlit beach. The sea was not just a physical challenge to be conquered, it was a spiritual realm to be respectfully approached. For ancient mariners, navigation was a sacred dialogue, a practice woven from equal parts stellar observation and spiritual belief. This profound connection governed every aspect of the journey, from the construction of the vessel to the final landfall. Before any launch, offerings were made to the gods of the ocean and to the ancestors who had sailed the same paths. This was not superstition. It was a critical psychological and social ritual that bound the crew together and aligned them with a purpose greater than themselves. The success of the voyage depended as much on this spiritual harmony as it did on accurate star readings. Anthropologists studying Polynesian traditions note the concept of tapu, a system of sacred prohibitions that maintained this balance. A navigator, for instance, might follow a strict protocol of not pointing directly at a guiding star with his finger, an act considered disrespectful to the celestial guide. Instead, he would indicate its position with a gesture of his lips or a tilt of his head, a subtle act of reverence that preserved the relationship between the human traveler and the cosmic map. This worldview saw the entire natural world as alive and interconnected. The wind, the waves, the stars, and the birds were not inanimate forces to be exploited, but conscious partners in a grand collaborative journey. This spiritual framework provided immense emotional support. Facing the terrifying emptiness of the open ocean, a crew fortified by ritual and shared belief could withstand psychological pressures that would break a group lacking such cohesion. Their journey was not an individual's quest but a collective cultural achievement, its success a testament to the entire community's relationship with the cosmos. This deep integration of the practical and the spiritual extended into the very stories they told. Myths and legends were not mere entertainment, they were encrypted libraries of navigational data. The widespread Polynesian legend of the demigod Maui fishing up islands from the seafloor is a beautiful example. Scholars suggest these stories might correspond to the discovery of actual volcanic seamounts or islands, their dramatic narrative providing a memorable sequence for sailing directions that could be recalled across generations. The myth becomes a map and the hero's journey a remembered route. How might our own modern endeavors be transformed if we infused them with a similar sense of sacred purpose and ritual, turning impersonal tasks into meaningful passages? This cultural and spiritual vessel, however, required a physical one to carry it across the sea. The vessel was the final, vital partner in the navigator's sacred dialogue with the sea. Its form was not an accident of tradition, but a direct physical response to the ocean's demands, a masterpiece of engineering refined over countless generations. Consider the Polynesian double-hulled canoe, two sleek bodies joined by a strong platform. This design offered a brilliant combination of speed and, most critically, immense stability. The wide platform created by the twin hulls resisted capsizing in the powerful swells of the open Pacific, while the shallow draft of each hull allowed the vessel to slide effortlessly over the water, catching the slightest breath of wind. This was a craft built for distance, not just for day trips. Its cavernous hulls and the deck between them could carry an entire community, along with months of provisions, live animals, and potted plants for establishing new settlements. The success of these vessels is no longer just theory. Modern experimental voyages, like those of the Hokule'a, a replica of an ancient Polynesian canoe, have proven their capabilities by sailing across thousands of miles of open ocean using only the traditional methods of wayfinding, demonstrating beyond any doubt that these designs were more than equal to the task of crossing the world's largest ocean. Across the globe, other cultures developed their own perfect solutions. High in the Andes, on the vast waters of Lake Titicaca, indigenous people constructed boats from the totora reed, a material that provided natural buoyancy and was readily available. These vessels were perfectly adapted to their high-altitude environment. In the Mediterranean, the Phoenicians engineered sleek, plank-built ships with a single square sail, optimized for sailing the predictable sea lanes of their trading empire, their narrow hulls cutting swiftly through the water. Each of these designs was a direct reflection of its environment. The addition of an outrigger, a single lateral float attached to a main hull, was a stroke of genius that provided crucial stability for smaller canoes in rough, unpredictable seas, preventing a capsize that would mean a certain end. Some cultures even incorporated early forms of waterproof compartments, using sealed sections of hull or large gourds to securely store their most precious cargo, fresh water, turning their vessel into a self-sustaining world for a journey of many months. The ship itself was a floating instrument, a physical extension of the navigator's knowledge. Its every curve and joint embodied an intimate understanding of wind, wave, and current. What could our own modern technologies achieve if they were born from such a deep, sustained, and respectful observation of a specific place? These remarkable vessels did not just carry explorers, they carried entire economies, connecting distant shores through the first great trade networks the world had ever seen. A lone obsidian blade found on a distant island 1,000 miles from its volcanic source is a silent testament to a world already deeply connected. These ancient mariners were the architects of the first global network, their ships carrying far more than just people and provisions. They transported the very building blocks of civilization, weaving together continents with threads of trade and cultural exchange long before the written word. The evidence for this prehistoric globalization is etched into the landscape itself. Across the immense span of the Pacific, from the shores of Madagascar all the way to the remote cliffs of Easter Island, hundreds of distinct cultures speak languages that trace back to a common ancestral tongue, a linguistic footprint of the Austronesian expansion. This was not a coincidence. It was the direct result of navigators guiding their families across thousands of miles of open ocean, carrying their words, their stories, and their identity with them in the hulls of their canoes. The archaeological record confirms this incredible mobility. Pottery fragments with distinctive stamped patterns, known as lapita ware, appear like a trail of breadcrumbs across the islands of Melanesia and Polynesia. Each new settlement, established through feats of wayfinding, became a node in a vast, informal web. Commodities that were precious and portable became the currency of this early world system. Spices from the Moluccas, prized for their flavor and preservative qualities, could find their way to mainland Asia. Obsidian, a volcanic glass valued for its sharp, flawless edge for tools and weapons, was traded across hundreds of miles of open water. These goods did not travel themselves, they were passed from hand to hand, from canoe to canoe, by navigators who knew the star paths between communities. This exchange was about more than economics, it was a continuous conversation between cultures. A new sail design perfected in one archipelago might spread across the entire ocean within a few generations. A creation myth or a navigational chant could be adapted and adopted, creating a shared cultural heritage across a seascape that spanned nearly a third of the planet. How does this change our understanding of human history? It reveals that isolation is a modern illusion, and that our species has always been defined by motion and connection, driven by the courage of those who could read the language of the sea. These initial trade routes, forged by necessity and exploration, would one day be traversed by a new kind of vessel, one carrying not just goods, but entire systems of belief and power. A distant smudge of green on the horizon was the end of a journey and the beginning of everything. For a canoe loaded with families, plants, and animals, that first sight of an uncharted island was the culmination of a carefully planned expedition, not a lucky accident. The peopling of our planet's most remote coastlines stands as the ultimate proof of ancient navigational genius, a deliberate expansion written in the currents and the stars. Modern genetics reveals this story in our very blood. DNA studies of Pacific populations show a clear trail of ancestry, a family tree whose branches spread across the ocean in a sequential pattern that mirrors the known pathways of star navigation. These were not people cast adrift, they were colonists setting out against the prevailing winds and currents on the outward journey. Why would they choose the harder path? Because they knew that when their new home was established, the same wind systems, which shift with the seasons, would provide a direct downwind route back to their origin point to share the news or bring more settlers. This was a round-trip strategy, a navigational insight that turned the ocean from a barrier into a two-way highway. Their deep environmental knowledge is etched into the landscape itself. Archaeologists find that the oldest villages are almost always clustered on the leeward sides of islands, the coasts sheltered from the dominant winds. This was a direct application of seafaring wisdom. A navigator knew that a safe harbor was not just a convenience, it was a matter of survival, and he could read the signs of a protected bay long before making landfall. This intentional settlement required more than supreme skill, it demanded a profound courage. Each new voyage was a leap into a void, a gamble that the mental map held in a single mind would lead not to emptiness but to a future. What inner force compels communities to risk everything on such a journey? It is the same spirit that has always pushed humanity beyond the known horizon, a testament to our collective resilience and our innate need to find what lies beyond. This deep understanding of the world's rhythms, the very cycles of wind and time, was what made such leaps of faith possible. The moon's silent pull governed the rhythm of every shoreline approach. For an ancient mariner, a full moon was not just a beautiful sight, it was a critical data point signaling the arrival of the strongest tidal currents of the month. These spring tides, with their dramatically high highs and low lows, could either be a navigator's greatest ally or his most formidable enemy. A captain aiming for a narrow river mouth or a shallow lagoon had to time his arrival with precision, riding the incoming high tide like a rising elevator to carry his vessel safely over submerged sandbars that would leave him stranded just hours later. This was not a matter of luck, it was a science of celestial timing, where the moon's phase directly translated into actionable intelligence about the water's depth and flow. Coastal communities from the Pacific Northwest to the shores of Southeast Asia developed intricate lunar calendars, tracking the moon's 29-day cycle to predict not just the tides, but the best times for fishing and gathering shellfish, their entire lives synchronized with this celestial clock. They understood the subtle difference between the powerful spring tides of the full and new moon and the gentler, weaker neap tides of the moon's quarters. This knowledge was vital for navigating complex coastlines, the turbulent, roaring water of a tide race where a powerful current squeezed between two headlands or islands became a recognizable sonic landmark. A seasoned navigator, hearing that distinct roar from a distance, could identify his position along a coast, using the sound and churning behavior of the water to map channels and avoid hidden reefs. This deep lunar wisdom integrated the vastness of the cosmos with the most immediate challenges of seamanship, turning the moon into a practical partner for every landing. How might our own modern, relentless schedules find a more natural harmony if we learn to notice and respect these persistent, gentle rhythms of the world around us? This intricate understanding of time extended far beyond the monthly cycle of the tides, encompassing the grand, slow turning of the seasons themselves. The decision to launch a great voyage was not taken lightly, nor was it made by consulting a simple date on a wall. It was a choice whispered by the land itself, announced by the blooming of a certain tree or the arrival of a great pod of whales on the horizon. Ancient mariners lived by ecological calendars, their most ambitious journeys synchronized with the planet's deep, predictable rhythms. This was a form of scheduling that integrated celestial events with the life cycles of the local environment, creating a holistic timetable for survival and exploration. Historical studies of Aboriginal Australian communities, for instance, show how coastal groups linked the heliacal rising of specific stars to seasonal shifts. The first appearance of a star like Sirius in the pre-dawn sky would signal not just a change in weather patterns, but the time when certain fish would spawn or when a particular root vegetable was ready to be harvested. This celestial event was a practical bulletin, telling the community it was time to move to a different part of the coast or to prepare the canoes for a trading voyage. For the Polynesian explorers, the timing of their epic colonizing voyages was a masterclass in strategic patience. They waited for the period when the trade winds were most stable and predictable, a window of calm between the storm seasons. This optimal time was almost certainly signaled by the position of key stars and constellations, which acted as a cosmic clock. Launching during this period meant they could harness the full power of the easterly trades for the initial outward push, confident that the weather would hold long enough for them to make a successful landfall. This was not a desperate gamble, it was a calculated departure based on generations of accumulated meteorological data. What does this teach us about our own relationship with time? In a world of instant gratification and relentless schedules, their practice reminds us that true efficiency often lies in alignment with natural cycles, not in fighting against them. This profound attunement to the seasons was their greatest strategic advantage, yet even the most perfectly timed voyage confronted the absolute limits of their incredible knowledge. The fog descends like a shroud, swallowing the world in a featureless gray. For a crew days from the nearest land, this silence is terrifying. The stars vanish, the sun becomes a dull smudge, and the familiar rhythm of the swells dissolves into a confused chop. In this blindness, the navigator's mind becomes his only compass, and the margin for error shrinks to nothing. Even the most skilled wayfinders faced the brutal reality of the sea's indifference. A single miscalculation in dead reckoning, a forgotten adjustment for a current pushed by a forgotten storm, could compound over days, leaving a vessel hundreds of miles off course in an empty ocean. The very tools they relied upon could turn against them. Being caught in the doldrums where the wind died for weeks was a slow, agonizing fate, depleting precious water supplies and testing the spirit of any crew. Misreading the flight of a bird, confusing a species that slept on the water with one that flew steadfastly toward an unseen shore, could lead a captain to make a fatal turn, sailing past salvation into an endless blue desert. Research into oral histories and the silent testimony of shipwrecks scattered across the seafloor reveals these common tragedies. Storms could erase all progress, blowing a vessel so far from its mental chart that the navigator had no reference point left to find his way home. Sometimes the knowledge itself was the most fragile cargo. If a master navigator perished at sea without passing on his full understanding, or if a community was disrupted by conflict or illness, entire star paths and the routes to distant islands could vanish in a single generation. The abandonment of the long-distance voyages to Easter Island, for instance, is thought by some scholars to be linked to such a loss, a severing of the thread that connected it to the wider Polynesian world. This acknowledgement of their limitations does not diminish their glory. It grounds it in a profound humanity. They were not superhuman, but individuals who chose to venture into the immense unknown armed with wisdom, courage, and the full acceptance of a possible, unmarked resting place in the deep. How does this understanding of their profound vulnerability change our view of their triumphs? It transforms their story from a mythic legend into a testament of human resilience, making every successful landfall not just a feat of skill, but a victory over unimaginable odds. The triumphant arrival of the Hokule'a in Tahiti in 1976 was more than a voyage, it was a resurrection. After centuries of dormancy, this replica of a Polynesian double-hulled canoe had just crossed over 2,000 miles of open ocean using only the stars, the swells, and the wind, guided by a navigator who had revived the ancient art. This modern journey proved what oral histories had always claimed, that these epic voyages were not only possible but repeatable. The Polynesian settlement of the Pacific stands as humanity's most audacious navigational achievement. Using their deep knowledge of the star compass and seasonal winds, they found and populated the most isolated islands on Earth, from the towering cliffs of New Zealand, known to the Maori as Aotearoa, to the lush archipelago of Hawaii, a journey of staggering distance and precision. Across the globe, the Phoenicians, master traders of the ancient Mediterranean, are recorded to have sailed around the entire continent of Africa, a feat ordered by an Egyptian pharaoh. According to the Greek historian Herodotus, they reported seeing the sun on their right-hand side, a detail that confirms their southern journey below the equator, a journey modern scholars once dismissed as impossible. The Norse sagas tell of Eirik the Red and his son Leif Erikson, who used their skills to cross the treacherous North Atlantic. They first settled Greenland, and then, around the year 1000, Leif pushed further west, discovering a land he called Vinland, what we now know as the coast of North America. Their success relied on a combination of sunstones to locate the sun on overcast days, shore-sighting birds released from the ship, and a brutal endurance for the cold northern seas. Experimental archaeology has brought these legends to life. The Kon-Tiki expedition, a balsa wood raft sailed across the Pacific in 1947, demonstrated that South American voyagers could have reached Polynesia. The Malia, a reconstructed Hawaiian voyaging canoe, has completed countless educational voyages across Polynesia, training a new generation in the old ways. These are not just recreations, they are validations, turning myth into measurable fact. What resonates so deeply in these stories of arrival against impossible odds? It is the timeless human spirit of discovery, the unshakable belief that the horizon is not a boundary but an invitation. Their legacy is not just in the lands they found, but in the boundless courage they continue to inspire. The sextant in a modern sailor's hand is a direct echo of the ancient camel, both tools built on the same unshakable truth that the heavens can guide us home. This lineage runs far deeper than any single instrument. The entire conceptual framework of modern navigation, from the vital practice of dead reckoning to the strategic use of ocean currents, was pioneered by those first mariners who trusted their senses and their intellect. Even in our age of global positioning systems, the fundamentals remain a critical safety net. Naval training across the world still emphasizes celestial navigation and weather reading as essential backup skills, recognizing that technology can fail, but the natural world offers a constant if you know how to listen. This is not merely a historical curiosity, it is a living bridge. The work of the Polynesian Voyaging Society exemplifies this powerful continuity. By building and sailing traditional canoes like the Hokule'a using only ancestral wayfinding methods, they have done more than prove a point, they have revived a culture. This movement has reintroduced star compasses and wave reading to indigenous youth, transforming ancient knowledge from a forgotten artifact into a source of profound identity, pride, and a deep sense of environmental responsibility. The legacy of these prehistoric explorers challenges us to look beyond the screen. It asks a compelling question: how can we weave this resilient, place-based wisdom into the fabric of our high-tech world? The answer may lie in a new kind of literacy, one that values the unerring certainty of a star path as much as the instant accuracy of a satellite. This is not about rejecting progress, but about building a more durable and deeply connected future, guided by the oldest maps ever made. A classroom in Hawaii does not teach from textbooks, but from the feel of coconut fiber rope in young hands as they lash together the frame of a voyaging canoe. This is the front line of a quiet revolution, a global movement to breathe life back into the ancient art of wayfinding before its last masters pass from the world. Across decades, a powerful cultural revival has taken root, led by indigenous communities and dedicated enthusiasts determined to reclaim a heritage nearly erased by time and technology. In the Marshall Islands, elders once again teach youth to read the subtle patterns of the ocean swells, using both the traditional stick charts and modern wave buoys that translate ancient wisdom into contemporary data. In Scandinavia, workshops revive the use of the sunstone, allowing new sailors to locate the hidden sun on a cloudy day just as the Vikings did. These are not nostalgic reenactments. They are living, dynamic programs built on the master-apprentice model, where knowledge flows directly from one generation to the next through youth voyages that transform lessons into lived experience. A student might first learn a star path through an immersive digital simulator, but they truly understand it only when they stand on the deck of a canoe like the Hokule'a, feeling the wind and watching that same star rise from the open ocean. Festivals of the sea from the Pacific to the Baltic have become vibrant hubs for this exchange, where chants for navigation are shared like heirlooms, and the act of sailing becomes a celebration of identity. This revival reaches far beyond technique. It is a profound journey to reconnect a people with their language, their environment, and their own sense of purpose. To learn the name of a star in your ancestral tongue is to hear the voice of your forebears. To steer by the swell is to feel a kinship with the ocean itself. What does it mean for a society to actively recover a lost piece of its soul? It is an act of resilience, a declaration that the most vital maps are not stored on servers, but carried in the human heart, ensuring that this timeless wisdom will guide generations yet to come. A designation by UNESCO for traditional navigation places it alongside flamenco and shadow puppetry as an intangible treasure of humanity. This official recognition frames the skills of the ancient mariner not as a forgotten relic, but as a living, breathing heritage. It is a knowledge system woven from equal parts astronomy, ecology, and spirituality, a practice that must be performed to be kept alive. Cultural preservation experts stress that this heritage extends far beyond the technical act of steering a canoe. It encompasses the epic chants that encode star paths, the rituals performed before a launch, and the very stories that give meaning to the journey. These are the vulnerable threads of the tapestry, the first to fray under the pressures of modernization and the passing of time. The Marshall Islands offer a powerful model for active safeguarding. There, community-led initiatives are not only teaching youth to read the ocean swells, but also the nearly lost art of constructing the rebelib, the traditional stick charts that map these waves. This work is a race against the silent clock of generations. As elder navigators, the last repositories of unrecorded wisdom, grow older, the task of capturing their oral histories becomes urgent. Younger community members often face the pull of globalized culture and economic necessities that draw them away from these ancestral skills. The question becomes, how does a global society contribute to protecting such a specific, place-based knowledge? The answer may lie in supporting these local efforts, in valuing indigenous science not as a curiosity, but as a vital contributor to our collective understanding. This cultural safeguarding finds a powerful ally in modern science, which is now using advanced tools to verify what the ancient wayfinders have always known. A stone adze found buried in an ancient Polynesian canoe shed is more than a tool, it is a data point. Science is now listening to the whispers of the ocean's oldest stories, using the rigorous language of archaeology and genetics to transform legendary voyages into documented history. Where oral traditions spoke of great migrations, we now find physical evidence. The discovery of a sophisticated canoe harbor on the island of Nuku-Hiva, its stone ramps and breakwaters precisely aligned to shelter vessels from the dominant swells, perfectly corroborates ancestral knowledge of wave patterns. This is not a coincidence, it is a blueprint, a physical manifestation of a navigator's mind etched into the landscape. The validation extends across the globe. At Elant's Ox Meadows in Newfoundland, the remains of Norse longhouses and artifacts like a bronze fastening pin provide undeniable, tangible proof of a Viking presence in North America centuries before Columbus, exactly as their sagas described. These archaeological sites are the hard evidence that the stories were true, that the impossible journeys actually happened. The scientific inquiry goes even deeper into the very cells of life itself. The sweet potato, a crop native to South America, was found growing across Polynesia when European explorers first arrived. For a long time, this was a mystery. How did it get there? Genetic sequencing now provides a stunning answer. The DNA of Polynesian sweet potatoes shows they arrived from South America in pre-Columbian times, confirming that indigenous voyagers had crossed the entire Pacific Ocean and returned, bringing New World plants back with them. This is not just proof of contact, it is proof of a two-way exchange, a network of knowledge spanning half the world. Computer simulations add another layer of proof. Projects like the Latitude Voyage use oceanographic data to model ancient routes, testing the feasibility of drifting versus intentional navigation. These models consistently show that the settlement of the remote Pacific Islands required skilled, directed sailing against prevailing winds and currents, not passive drifting. The drift voyages simply do not lead to the right places while the star paths do. How does this mounting evidence reshape our perception of the past? It tells us that these narratives were not myths, but meticulously preserved records of human achievement. This empirical confirmation does more than satisfy our curiosity. It forces a profound re-evaluation of human ingenuity, revealing a sophistication we are only beginning to measure. This growing respect for their technical mastery naturally leads us to consider the deeper philosophy that guided their hand, a world built on reciprocity with the natural world. A navigator's survival depended on a sacred pact with the sea itself, a relationship built not on dominance but on profound reciprocity. This was the core of their environmental ethic, a lived philosophy that recognized humanity as one strand in a vast, living web. Ancient voyagers understood that to harm the ocean was to sever their own lifeline, so they governed their actions with principles of balance that ensured resources would endure for generations. On long voyages, this meant taking only the fish that were needed for sustenance, never depleting a school beyond its ability to recover. When making landfall on a new island, a practice known as rahui or temporary prohibition was often enacted. Chiefs or navigators would declare certain reefs or forests off limits, allowing animal populations and plant life to establish themselves before any harvesting began. These were not arbitrary rules, they were sophisticated conservation strategies born from deep observation. Communities noticed that protecting a fishing ground during a species spawning season resulted in greater abundance the following year. They learned that cutting down too many trees for canoe building on a small island led to erosion that could silt up the very lagoons they relied upon for food. This knowledge was encoded into cultural protocols, often wrapped in spiritual belief to ensure compliance. The ocean was not a dead space to be crossed, but a living ancestor, a relative whose health was directly tied to their own. Can you sense the difference between this worldview and one that sees the natural world as a warehouse of inert materials for our use? In our current era of climate change and resource depletion, these ancient principles of restraint and respect resonate with urgent relevance. They demonstrate that long-term resilience is not a product of technological supremacy alone, but of a conscious, ethical partnership with our environment. This deep, personal relationship with the world required a specific kind of individual, one whose inner transformation was as important as their skill with a star chart. That first solo voyage ends with a profound silence, the canoe gliding onto the sand as the young navigator steps ashore, forever changed. This was far more than a test of memory, it was a crucible that forged the soul. The knowledge of the stars and swells meant nothing without the inner transformation to wield it. The journey to mastery demanded a radical remaking of the self, cultivating a patience that could endure weeks of uncertainty, and an observation so acute it could feel the shift of a current in the dark. A novice learned to sit with his fear, to quiet the panicked voice that screamed during a storm, and to trust the quiet intuition that grew from years of watching and waiting. This was education as initiation, a path where failure was not a mark of shame but a vital lesson written in the language of wind and wave. Anthropologists studying these mentorship traditions note that the master did not simply lecture. He created scenarios posing riddles of the sea that the apprentice had to solve. He might ask, what does that specific cloud formation tell you about the land you cannot see? Why are these birds flying so low at this hour? The student learned by doing, by feeling, and most of all, by making mistakes in controlled settings where the consequences were a lesson, not a tragedy. Achieving the status of a PWO, or Master Navigator, in Micronesian culture was one of the highest honors, but it came with a heavy mantle of responsibility. The community now looked to this individual not just for direction, but for wisdom, for leadership in times of crisis, and for the protection of their most vital knowledge. The navigator became a pillar of the community, his personal journey of self-discovery directly linked to the well-being of everyone. This transformative process reveals navigation as a profound path to cultural identity. To know the star paths of your ancestors is to know who you are and where you come from in the deepest sense. It roots you in a lineage of explorers and instills a humility that comes from understanding your small place within a vast living cosmos. What inner journeys might we undertake if we embraced a modern practice with such depth, seeking not just competence but a true mastery that changes us from within? As we near the end of our exploration, we are left to ponder the enduring mysteries that still whisper from the depths of time. The Hawaiian proverb echoes a truth these navigators lived by: the future is found in the past. We have journeyed together across a sea of stars, felt the ancient pulse of ocean swells, and learned the language of the wind, uncovering the profound ingenuity of those who mapped our world. This was not a story of instruments but of integration, a deep and respectful dialogue with the natural world that required immense trust, flawless memory, and a resilient spirit. Their legacy offers us timeless lessons in sustainability, reminding us that our greatest resource is a conscious partnership with our environment, and in exploration, proving that the human capacity for discovery is boundless when guided by courage and observation. This journey does not have to end here. You can carry this wisdom forward, look up on a clear night and trace the path of a rising star, just as a Polynesian wayfinder once did. Seek out and support the incredible cultural revivals keeping these skills alive across the globe, or simply stand by the shore and marvel at the vast, blue wilderness these masters learned to call home. We would love to hear which part of this incredible story resonated most with you. Was it the celestial compass, the feeling of waves in the dark, or the profound courage of setting sail into the unknown? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this voyage into history's greatest enigmas, subscribe for more journeys into the mysteries that shaped our world. Thank you for sailing with us through this epic story of human achievement.